Chapter 11. Restraint. It isn't until after he's turned his head that Zuko realizes that something is different. He can move. Not much, and not without difficulty, but he can at least move his head without pain so intense that it makes him retch. A small improvement, but that's usually the best he can hope for. His vision seems a little clearer too. Though edges soften and blur, and the light from outside is bright enough to make his head pound, the details don't attempt to swim clear of his reach. He is in a cave, that much is clear. The walls around him are dark and drab, and the ceiling is low enough that he would have to duck his head if he could stand. If he could find the strength to move that far. But he can scarcely raise his head up off the ground, and a gentle voice in his memory tells him not to move, to rest, and to give himself time to heal. That's right. He can remember things too. He remembers a shadow in the mouth of the cave, a shadow that came closer until he could finally recognize the painted lady kneeling at his side. He remembers her voice, gentle, if a little distant, as she told him to rest. He remembers her hands on his chest and an unearthly bluish glow that dulled all the sharpest edges. That must be why the pain is less consuming than he remembers. The ache in his chest still worsens with every breath, and nearly everything else hurts as well, but it's less. She must have helped him. She must have done something to drive away the edges of the pain. He can't imagine why. This is far from the first time he's been hurt, and he's encountered plenty of spirits in his life. They've never once taken an interest in him before. What makes this time so different? Why is he worthy of the spirit's notice now? He almost thinks that it was all a hallucination. That none of his memories after the injuries can be real. That maybe the pain was so severe that it muddled his mind and conjured the painted lady from nothing. People talked about her in Shusoku, didn't they? Maybe that's what he's remembering, and his mind is just twisting things until it seems real and he can see the spirit herself. But he remembers seeing Kentaro Bumu. He remembers keeping low to the ground, creeping nearer and nearer until he could see the rivets and seams in Kentaro's mechanical arm. He remembers the painted lady making her approach up the hill, then veering off the path just as Kentaro surged out of hiding. He remembers the split-second decision to follow, and his inexplicable resolve to protect her, no matter what the cost. After that, everything grows less distinct. Just a haze of near unbearable heat and light, and then falling into blackness. He can't have imagined that. He knows that he's hurt. He knows that it had to happen somehow, and his memories are too clear right up until the end. He can't have imagined the painted lady any more than he's imagining his own injuries, or the man who caused them. Zuko turns his head toward the side where he remembers her kneeling in the night. She isn't there. It shouldn't surprise him. He can hardly imagine that a spirit who only ever visited Shusoku after dark would bother staying with him in the daytime. She isn't there, but a small, unfamiliar leather pouch lies just within arm's reach. If he can manage, he needs to find out what it is. It takes a considerable effort to raise his arm, and when he manages it, he pauses, startled into stillness when he discovers a blanket draped across his chest. That is new to him. He certainly doesn't remember having a blanket before. The painted lady must have left that, too. By the time he reaches the pouch and succeeds in dragging it closer, his strength is drained almost to nothing. It's heavy enough that he has to assume that it's a water skin, and all at once, he realizes how dry his throat is. He fumbles for the cork, to no avail. His hands are too clumsy, and his arms too weak. And after struggling with it for what feels like ages, both arms fall limp, the water skin still tucked against his side like a child's toy. He couldn't have lifted it anyway, he tells himself. Or if he had managed, he would have lost his grip and spilled out its contents, or dropped the entire water skin on his face. As badly as he needs something to drink, neither would have done him any good. Tonight, he can last that long without water, and if the painted lady returns, she might be kind enough to help him drink. And if not, if Zuko is really alone, maybe he'll be strong enough to try again. He's asleep when Katara arrives. Good. He needs the rest, and if she can spend an hour or two healing him and sneak away unseen, all the better. Now that she's come to him once in the guise of a spirit, she has no choice but to keep up the charade, and the less he sees of her, the better the chances that the illusion will hold. The better his chances of making a real recovery. She walks as lightly as she can, stepping on soft grass and packed soil to avoid any cracking twigs or crunching gravel, and crouches down beside him. He's pale like before, but his expression is placid and his breathing even, if a little shallow. He's better than last night. Not strong enough to survive long on his own, but better. For now, that's all she can expect. She lets her hand hover just a fraction over his forehead, not quite brushing the skin. Like when she left him, he is warm, but she can't quite tell whether it's a fever or not. Not without touching him. Not without disturbing his sleep. Of course, she'll likely wake him when she pulls the blanket away to get at his broken ribs, but for now, she just watches him. He's peaceful. Quiet and still and vulnerable. Somehow, it still takes her by surprise. She isn't used to seeing him like this, even after the catacombs. He just looks so young, so soft. I couldn't get the water open. The voice is faint and crackling, and for a moment, Katara isn't entirely sure that it's real. It doesn't sound like Zuko. The hard, angry edge to his voice is gone, replaced by thin, crackling weariness. But when she pulls her arm back, his tired golden eyes stare up at her, and he does his best to push the blanket down from his shoulders. She follows his feeble gesture to where the water skin lies tucked beneath his arm, unopened. Last night, she'd left it behind, hoping that he might at least be able to drink. She can't leave food behind, not yet. Not when he is still so weak. Not when the wildlife might come snooping around in search of food and find him lying here, defenseless. Somehow, though, she'd managed to forget that a full water skin might be too heavy for him to lift. You need to drink, she says, doing her best to disguise her voice. I know. I tried, but... He's misunderstood her. He thinks she's upset, that she's reprimanding him for not making use of the water she left. That's the trouble with disguising her voice. She can't speak too plainly, or he might suspect that she isn't the painted lady after all, and yet her stiff formality doesn't leave enough room for softness. She shakes her head. How to approach this without sounding too human? What happened? My hands. Katara follows his gaze downward to the pale hand struggling to raise more than a few inches off of his chest. With a frown, she lets her hand hover over his, just near enough to feel his warmth, to sense his energy. The burns are gone. His hands are undamaged as far as she can tell. Are they hurting? She asks in a whisper. Maybe she's left some scar tissue behind. Maybe that's what's bothering him. Maybe there's a lingering ache that she won't be able to fix. Zuko shakes his head ever so slightly. No, they just can't. He tries to make a fist, but tremors run through his hand until he has to give up and lower it back to his chest. Katara wants to take hold of his hand. She wants to cradle it between both of her own and hold it steady until the trembling stops. Instead, she wraps them around the water skin. She can't do that. She isn't here to comfort, only to heal. You need help, she tries, a little quieter this time. There's a flash of something in his eyes. Sorrow, humiliation, she can't tell which. But then he nods. I think so. Simple enough. She can help him drink. She can drain the water skin until it's light enough for him to lift, then work on his ribs until her energy for healing is spent, and that will be the end of it. She'll have done all she can for him, and she can return to camp and do her best to forget him until tomorrow night. She removes the cork, and just as she starts to draw the water out with her bending, she catches another glimpse of his eyes. They're clearer than before. They still fade in and out of focus, but he's watching her. At least most of the time. He seems to understand what she's doing. She releases the water before it can emerge from the mouth of the water skin. No bending. Not while he's watching her. He has to remember what waterbending looks like, and if he sees it, he'll begin to suspect her. Katara can't risk that. Especially not now, when he's barely stable enough to last a day on his own. All his suspicions would be correct, and he would remember her in a heartbeat. And if she reveals herself, she'll have no choice but to abandon him. She won't be able to risk turning him over to the village if he knows she's nearby. She's been discovered once already. She refuses to put herself in that kind of danger again. But he won't last on his own. If she leaves him now, all her work will have been for nothing. He'll be dead in a matter of days. She wonders how long she can keep up this charade. Sooner or later, Zuko is going to look beneath the veil and realize that the features look familiar. He will recognize her as an enemy, and then leaving him behind is the kindest option she can think of. Maybe if she's lucky, she'll be close to leaving too. Maybe she'll be able to point the villagers toward his hiding place and then vanish before they can hunt for her. Maybe they'll look after him when she can't anymore. Or maybe that's too optimistic. Maybe Zuko will attack like he's done before, and Katara will have to flee. Maybe he'll force her to leave him alone. But for now, she tries to push that possibility out of her mind. He doesn't recognize her yet, and for now, he still needs her. Katara hesitates a moment before she slips a hand beneath his shoulders and lets his head come to rest in the crook of her elbow. He grimaces with the motion, and Katara holds him still and steady until the creases in his forehead begin to smooth. He looks so vulnerable like this, yet so open and trusting. She tips the water skin to his lips and lets him drink his fill before her thoughts can wander any further, before her most foolish impulses can win her over, and she ends up cradling him, stroking his hair until he falls asleep. Healing, not comfort, she reminds herself. That's what she's here for, and that's what Zuko needs. A low, painful groan escapes him as she lowers him back to the ground, and Katara averts her eyes, focusing on the water skin. If she doesn't look at him, then maybe she'll be able to restrain herself from doing anything stupid. Zuko draws a few harsh, ragged gasps before his breathing steadies again. The pain is evident in the sound of it, but Katara clenches her jaw. It's his ribs bothering him, and they won't be soothed by anything short of healing water. She knows that. She needs to remember it. In the meantime, she dangles the water skin outside the mouth of the cave, letting its contents trickle out until it's only half full, then returns to his side. Delicately, doing her best not to touch him, she balances the water skin on one of his hands. "Can you lift it now?" His hand trembles, but after some effort, he raises it an inch or two. He nods faintly. "I think so." Good. Katara replaces the cork and settles the water skin back in against his side. By the time he needs more to drink, he'll feel better. His chest will hurt less, and he should be better rested. By then, he should be able to manage it on his own. "Why do you care?" he rasps after a pause. "The spirits have never helped me before." In Katara's experience, few of them do. Most spirits care more for themselves and their homes than for any people who might happen to share their corner of the world. They are usually apathetic at best. But by the look on Zuko's face, she can see that he doesn't stop there. He doesn't just believe that the spirits have forgotten him. He thinks that they are determined to harm him. "You helped the village," she answers. The Painted Lady did thank Katara back in Jianghui. It isn't entirely unreasonable to think that she would go a step further for Zuko here. He scoffs. "Helped. I dug a hole in the ground." His voice catches on the last word, and he coughs a few times, face contorting horribly. She can't stand to watch any longer. While his eyes are shut, Katara coats her hands in water and presses them to his bare, shuddering chest. He hasn't seen her heal before. So long as the water remains out of sight, he shouldn't recognize what she's doing. The glow should be unfamiliar enough to trick him, at least for a while. Slowly, his face relaxes again, and his eyes open a slit. "You dug a well. You brought them water," she says softly, keeping her eyes focused on her hands as she searches for the cracks and brings the bones back into alignment. "They had the river. The well, it was just something to make me feel useful." Katara shakes her head. The river was too far away. They didn't have the strength to make the trip anymore. The well brought water where they could reach it. In the periphery, she sees his arm tighten just a little around the water skin, holding it snug against his side as though it's something familiar and comforting rather than just a leather pouch. "Life relies on water," she adds when he goes still again. "You brought that back to them. Of course you helped." Zuko frowns, but he makes no attempt to argue. Katara's forehead creases as she focuses harder on mending his chest. Bone is difficult to work with, and she has to manipulate all the fluid around it to push fragments back where they belong and fix them in place. Even then, the seams feel fragile, like a single jolt or cough could break them all loose again. It's a start, though. If she can put everything back in its proper place, then it should be easier to bind it all together and keep it from splintering again. "You helped them too," Zuko whispers, almost as though he's afraid to breathe too deeply while she works on his chest. "You helped them more." She pauses in the middle of sealing a particularly nasty fracture. "How do you know that?" "They talked about you. I didn't believe it at first, but then..." His brow furrows. "I saw you too." On the night of the attack, she assumes, he must have been watching her. He must have heard enough rumors to pique his interest, then snuck out into the night to watch for her. She remembers feeling a second pair of eyes following her through the village, and an uneasy tingling at the back of her neck that intensified the farther she ventured from the houses. She remembers feeling the presence in the village as wary and suspicious, and the one in the open as sinister, even downright terrifying. She remembers the moment when she considered turning back for the village to hide among the houses and take her chances with whoever was waiting for her there. Maybe if she had, this would never have happened. Maybe Zuko would have been okay. But then maybe the man would have caught her instead. Maybe Zuko wouldn't have been able to stop it. Why aren't you in Shusoku now? His voice breaks through her thoughts. They matter more than me. Her insides turn cold at that last part, and she pulls her gaze away from his bruised and broken chest to meet his eyes. Does he mean that? Does he believe it? They don't need my help, she replies. It's the safest answer she can think of. And with the carts and the visitors from Shujing, she thinks it might be true. The village can rebuild itself now. She looks deep into his eyes. But you do. His single eyebrow lowers a bit and his forehead creases. But the spirits never help me. I'm not lucky. The world just keeps trying to crush me. Katara tries to keep working, though she can't manage to look away. He's so uncertain, so lost, and it hurts more than she expects to see him question his worth like this. Whatever else he may be, he's still the boy who saved her life. He knows that, doesn't he? She can't bring herself to say it. So why do you trust me to help you? He struggles with that one for a moment. The pain seems to be wearing on him, and his eyelids sag. As far as she's concerned, that's a good thing. The sooner he sleeps, the sooner she can stop hiding her water from him, and the sooner she can start trying to push his voice back out of her head. You helped Shusoku, he settles on eventually. You helped them. Lots of spirits don't help. He makes a surprisingly good point. She's encountered plenty of unhelpful spirits in the past several months. Katara turns her focus back to his ribs. And lots of people don't help either. But you did, so I'll help you in return. Zuko nods, but his eyes have closed, and he's beginning to drift. For a few moments, he is silent, and Katara begins to believe that he is asleep. But then, in the faintest rasp, what's wrong with me? By the time she realizes that he isn't being metaphorical, he's already sleeping. Still, she finds her eyes drawn lower, toward where she knows the mass of twisted energy swirls around his spine. Tentatively, she reaches toward it and feels as deep as her bending will let her. A storm of burning, damaged energy surges up to meet her hand, and she has to pull away. She bites her lip and squeezes her eyes shut. In a way, she is afraid to finish with his ribs. Because as soon as they are healed, she'll have to confront whatever is at the core of that horrible, darkened wrongness.